Welcome to Beyond. I'm Dr. Patricia Hill.
And I'm Alan Steinfeld. Each week, we're going to journey into new areas of discovery and into lost knowledge.
We'll be interviewing cutting-edge researchers, leading scientists, and forward thinkers about unexplained phenomena on this planet and beyond.
In this first interview, I'll be talking to John Burke. He's a geophysical investigator, and he'll be telling me about the relationships between Earth energies and ancient sites around the world.
Our second guest is Nancy Talbot, who makes a connection between these energies and crop circles.
So join us as we talk to John Burke and go beyond. On this program today, we'll be talking to John Burke, who's a geophysical investigator. He's going to be talking to us about the science behind sacred sites, crop circles, the ancient monuments, and what it is that makes them special, magical, and particularly sensitive to human consciousness. Thank you, John, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You've taken instruments, you've measured what it is that makes something a sacred site.
I actually don't use the word sacred for that reason. I believe that in most of these cases it was a very physical purpose and a very physical action that occurred there more so than a spiritual one. But
there meaning places like Stonehenge,
sure.
Salisbury Hill, and
pyramids, both Egyptian and Mayan, North American Indian mounds.
So you bring instruments to these locations, and what is it that you find?
What I find is that in particular places and also at particular times of day, it becomes clear that over and over again the ancient builders of these structures primarily chose types of geology, if you will, places where the geology naturally concentrated the normal electromagnetic fluctuations that take place on the Earth every day, everywhere. But they're more concentrated and stronger in some places. And over again, those are the spots where the ancient builders chose to place these structures. One that's lesser known, which is these rock chambers, or dolmens as they're technically called. They exist from England to Italy, but also throughout the northeastern U.S. as well, and were built over a 3,000-year period. So they're clearly not a cultural phenomenon. They've been built by many different cultures in many different places. The roof, though, is usually flat stone slabs, often very magnetic rock. And what I've confirmed is it does stratify the air in here electrically. There'll be negative air towards the top, positive air towards the bottom, and pulses taking place.
You're saying the land underneath that whole area is conducting high electromagnetic charge.
Well, let me show you exactly. This particular one, which is in Mount Ninum Park in New York State, is located on a mountain that has high magnetic readings. And it's in an intersection of two zones on this mountain. Everything to my left and downhill here has got a much lower but very stable magnetic reading. As soon as you get uphill to my right from this spot, the readings start to rise dramatically and you start to get a lot of change. This is actually one of the more modest chambers. It's not too high. You've got to crouch in here. But this is a particularly energetic chamber. In fact, a photo taken by one of my colleagues on infrared film, there was nothing visible to the naked eye, but when the infrared film was developed, it showed a floating ball of energy right about here where my right hand is, just suspended in midair, with tentacles almost emerging from it. It looks highly electrical. Wherever you have a site where ground that is poorly conductive meets ground that's strongly conductive, at that intersection you have these magnification of all these effects that I'm talking about. And those kind of intersections are where these ancient monuments have been sited for 5,000 years.
Well, this is some of the work around crop circles in England where these two different types of soil or earth come together.
Well, all I can tell you is that when I worked there with Avebury, Silbury Hill, and Windmill Hill, three of the oldest and largest megalithic structures in Europe, they are very close to one another. They clearly match up with the geology of this type. And when I was there working on it, you could see these crop circles all over the place.
What I'm fascinated with is something in the human physiology that can detect these electromagnetic currents.
Sure.
And is it about our
Sometimes.
physiology?
The simple law or principle in physics is called induction, and it's actually the way our electrical power plants work. Anytime you have a changing magnetic field, that will generate an electric current in anything present that's capable of conducting electricity.
Right.
Now that includes the ground, and we have ground currents that run through the earth every day. That's a standard part of geophysics. But our brains are obviously very good conductors of electricity, and so naturally we're going to also have electrical currents generated in our own brain. I had an interesting experience out in Petroglyph National Park, northwest of Albuquerque. It's the biggest one of these discontinuities in the United States. So the
Yes.
geology is the most dramatic there for these energies. And it's Petroglyph Park because it's the biggest concentration of rock art. And during the course of a day, I stumbled into a surge of energy that was clearly being emitted from the rocks. There was clearly an electrical ground current in the rock there that ionized the air around it. And it began to just rise very dramatically at one point late in the afternoon. And I followed it as it spread throughout this ridge. It was very intriguing. And when I mentioned it to the park ranger in the visitor center, she said, you know, a lot of people come here and they tell me, I always like to go up into the rocks and feel the energies. And she said, I've been dismissing them as a bunch of new age crazies, but you're telling me there may be something to that. And so I told her about 2% of today's population. The University of Munich and others have done very good studies demonstrating that a small percentage of even contemporary humans can just sense very small disturbances in the electrical or magnetic fields.
Probably if we were living in nature, we'd have more of that sensitivity.
I think so, because normally we're surrounded by permanent magnets in the form of steel beams and the cars that we get into. We're certainly surrounded by all sorts of electrical forces, and that's got to make us less sensitive than, say, an ancient shaman thousands of years ago who spent most of his time outside.
Basically, you're saying the land underneath that whole area is conducting high electromagnetic charge.
Well, now here what we're talking about is 3 different levels of chalk aquifer that do slant up and hit the surface of the ground here.
Chalk aquifer means there's the soil is made of chalk, and underneath that there's water, or
Exactly.
Okay.
Or within the pores of the chalk, there's water.
Oh, okay.
And what's important about that is that when water percolates through porous rock, that alone creates electrical charge. So that's another effect that I haven't mentioned until now, which is really dominant in places like England that have a lot more limestone and chalk than they do, say, magnetic rock.
Oh, I see. So that could be an explanation why there's more of these mounds and also crop circles appearing there.
Well, there is a lot more, yes, of this earth energy of an electrical nature, really, not so much magnetic.
And you found that if an ancient culture placed a seed inside one of these mounds or sacred circles, they would increase their food production. How would that work?
There are electrical forces that can be good for the growth of seeds.
Yeah.
And one question I asked myself was, why did these ancient peoples go to such almost absurd extremes to invest so much effort and energy into building these structures?
Because you're talking about a small population that's agricultural, and yet they put thousands of manpower hours into building these hills.
You take Silbury Hill, the largest mound in Europe. 14 million man-hours, yet the population of the area is estimated to have been less than 4,000 people at the time. And in fact, the area had already been abandoned because of poor soil, and exhausted soil, poor farming material in the days before the existence of fertilizer or crop rotation were known.
Right.
This small band of people moves back into this exhausted soil. They're obviously scraping to get by as subsistence farmers, and they spend 14 million man-hours building this mound. I wanted to know why. That seems like a sure recipe for suicide.
How could they have known that that was going to work?
I have to guess that it came from some form of original trial and error based on observation over hundreds of years. Because even Silbury Hill, which was put up 500 years before the Egyptian pyramids, that was already 500 years younger than Windmill Hill Causewayed Enclosure, which is next door to it. Now that was circular ditches. Archaeologists have found wheat seeds that were brought there and placed in shallow pits in the ground, right where the energy would have been concentrated. And they weren't seeds that simply fell in from a field. They were seeds that were carefully cleaned first. Any trace of weed seed was removed. Somebody took a lot of trouble to take this somewhat valuable seed and processed seed, bring it there, and deposit it right in a spot that would have concentrated the same kind of energies that improved the growth.
The substance of the force, the electromagnetic force that comes through there, what does it actually do to a seed to make it more productive?
What we know the modern laboratory controlled versions do is to actually generate a physiological response inside the cell that makes the seed more tolerant to the stress of free radicals.
Because free radicals age the body, and if we have free radical protection, we can maintain a sort of vitality.
Right, and the exact same thing is true on a more accelerated time frame in a plant that only lasts 1 year. So anything that does help fight off those will enable a more vigorous plant to grow and to produce more food. We take it for granted, at least here today, that we'll easily have enough food to survive. These were subsistence agricultural civilizations before the effects of crop rotation and fertilizer were discovered around 1000 BC. Once those were discovered, Stonehenge was abandoned. People stopped coming. And that was true in these other sites, which other continents and areas that discovered crop rotation and discovered fertilizer at different periods. Once they did find that, they didn't have to go to these great efforts.
So Stonehenge was abandoned because
well, it was abandoned at the same time that agriculture in England began using fertilizer and crop rotation, and that's an awful lot of coincidence in my book.
So your explanation would be that it was no longer needed to
Exactly.
increase productivity, and also the Druidic societies around there were also dying out due to influx of other
Actually,
religions.
that's a misunderstanding.
Oh, really?
The Druids weren't even in England at the
They
time
weren't.
Stonehenge was abandoned.
Then who were the people that built the...
No, well, they're called the Beaker people based on the fact that they liked to drink beer and were buried with their vessels, and that's about all anybody knows about them.
But I'm sure healing also was amplified in these kind of sites, these kind of megalithic sites.
We don't know about that. What is kind of interesting is the folklore from the last few hundred years surrounding places like Stonehenge and Avebury does stress healing and pregnancy as reasons to visit the site. And also there's an atmospheric components I haven't talked about. They're less important probably, but they are known pulses that penetrate from the ionosphere that sort of shake the Earth's magnetic field lines, sometimes very dramatically so for a small area. And they take place in the wee hours of the morning. And there's a phenomenon known to psychologists as the 3 a.m. wow, which is that time when you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't know why, you can't quite go back to sleep, but suddenly a solution pops into your mind to some problem that you've been struggling with.
Yeah, that happens, yes.
Well,
and then you grab for a piece of paper and you write it down, but what are they saying it's about from?
Well, no one is saying anything in that regard as far as I know, but I find it interesting that that's the same time frame during the course of a day in which all these energy fluctuations that I'm talking about are maximized. And so perhaps there's a connection. That's a guess on my part.
Well, have you yourself, can you talk about any experiences you've had at these areas?
No, I'm a real slug. I've been to all these areas and people ask me what kind of special experiences did you have, and I've had none. I'm usually, though, bent over a meter with a flashlight in a very, very different mindset.
So you don't feel anything? You're
No,
just...
I really don't. Yet I've had mysterious things like batteries fail in my camera, which when I took them away from the ancient site, functioned perfectly again, bring them back, they fail again. I've had others working with me who've had that same experience. Although the first time I did go out in and out of one of these rock chambers, one of these dolmens, repeatedly crossing magnetic field lines, during the course of a day, I actually feared for my life by the end of that day. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack.
Because some electromagnetic current within your body wasn't adjusting to all these different fields?
Well, I just have to guess that maybe what was happening was electric currents being generated in my body at random intervals wasn't the best thing for my heart, perhaps.
So you did feel something?
Yeah, it was bad.
You're not such a slug.
Well, I had no uplifting experiences. But I've been, frankly, quite uplifted by realizing that we're effectively in a dance, in an electromagnetic dance with our home planet every day, whether we realize it or not. And realizing it is a thrill for me, and I think it would be a thrill for a lot of people to realize that this is something that's happening with all of us all the time.
I'm talking to John Burke, geophysical investigator. We've been talking about the mounds around Europe and the Americas, and you were saying, John, that there's a whole bunch of megalithic sites in this country that have been built for various reasons.
That's part of a whole system of mound building that built thousands of mounds throughout the middle part of our country, all up through the Mississippi River and its tributaries.
So these mounds are like hills that are hollow inside, right?
No, they're not hollow. They're solid man-made mounds, though, that were erected by simply people carrying basket loads of earth up and dumping them, and we're talking the tune of 20, 30 million man-hours in some of these cases.
They're huge, these mounds.
Yes, some of them. The biggest one in Cahokia, Illinois, rivals the Great Pyramid in Giza in terms of volume. Now, one of the most intriguing ones is the Serpent Mound. That's very well known. And its geology is particularly dramatic in all these regards. We took instruments and seeds there twice and find there are interesting forces at work there. Produced minor improvements in the seed one of the times we took them, but a second time we took them there was a thunderstorm in the area, and that produced dramatically altered magnetic fields and electric ground currents in the area where the seeds were placed on the ground.
These shamans or sensitives in these ancient cultures followed the Earth's energy and created the serpent mounds around the movement of these energies?
Actually, that serpent mound, the whole site it's placed on is a very narrow bluff, and that whole bluff is very powerful in regards to magnetic alterations, and it's in the perfect location to maximize electrical currents, although those weren't measured. And I did measure electric charge in the air there that was unusual.
Let's talk about Ganjiwam, because Ganjiwam is what I've heard is a place where people have incredible emotional experiences.
Yes, Ganjiwam, which is in southeastern Connecticut, it's a swamp, but it's preserved, is a good example of what you were talking about before. How did people know? How did people know that these forces were present? Today, they started realizing that there's something funny going on there when they would take tours of people in the Ganjiwam Society, and at the foot of this one cliff, they came to name the Cliff of Tears. People would simply break down hysterically, crying and sobbing. Men would burst into nosebleeds, and a number of women started menstruating spontaneously. They took me up there, that group, and they never even told me which one was the cliff. They were very shrewd about it. They just sort of said, there's some interesting stuff around here. And I followed my instrument up, and running through the face of that cliff is a 6-inch band of magnetic ore, which gave the strongest readings I've ever found in a natural setting. And so it was right at that point.
And that magnetic strip will trigger some emotions or physiological changes in the body?
Apparently it did to a percentage of people, and they were fairly dramatic.
And you didn't have anything?
No, I haven't slept out there. I haven't had the courage to try that. And I feel there's a lot of other people who are probably more sensitive in that regard. My job is to be the one guy who comes in with instruments and looks objectively at all of this.
Well, thank you for joining us. I mean, my feeling is that there have been people throughout human civilization that have developed their sensitivity and understood from what you're saying the true nature of earth energies, and have been able to tune their human instrument not only to have spiritual experiences but to have increase in crop productivity and to create societies around these special electromagnetic currents in the earth.
When you think of it today, the biggest structures that we modern people build are probably hydroelectric dams.
Right.
And why do we build them? We build them because they're worth the effort, because they produce electricity, which is the lifeblood of an industrial civilization. In this case, we're talking about structures that were built requiring enormous effort that produced fertility, which is the lifeblood of an agricultural civilization. So looked at that way, they weren't any different than we are. They were just a different set of people working with a different knowledge base and a different set of tools to solve the same problems.
Alan, that was a wonderful interview with John Burke.
Thank you. What I liked about him is that he's a pretty straight, traditional scientist. He has the instrumentation, and he goes out and measures things that people in the past have felt with their bodies and their awareness.
Yes, isn't it great that we have those instruments now that we can verify these things and prove that people aren't making these things up?
What I would like is that we start to reconnect with those feelings, those sensitivities, so we can start to feel the earth and the environment more.
Yes, most of us are so out of touch because we live in cities. We're surrounded by electromagnetic energies in our homes and cell phones and all sorts of things that we really have been dulled down, I think.
Right, and we have the human facility. Our brains are probably the best instruments you can have in this universe to be aware of energy. So he is just proving what we've all known and what the ancients actually knew and built these sites around.
Yes, the ancients used them for their very survival, and we may come to that point ourselves. So I think we need to get back in touch with those energies now.
And like he says, we're in this electromagnetic dance all the time, and as we become more aware, I think we'll be more connected to each other and the universe and whatever's beyond ourselves.
Yes, well, I believe that these interviewers have presented us with the idea that all things are connected.
Well, in your interview that's coming up, we'll have a great example of what is beyond our normal awareness. You want to talk about it?
Yes, our next guest will be Nancy Talbot, who is president of BLT Research of Boston. Nancy investigates the effects on crops of a little-known energy or a matter that is called plasma. It's a fourth state of matter, and it may be a basic element in creation. Nancy measures these energies in crop circles, proving that many of them could not be man-made.
So stay tuned as we take you beyond.
Nancy, welcome to
Hi.
the show.
Hi.
Were you attracted to this research through the same type of experiences that John Burke had with the natural earth energies and phenomena that he observed?
I think John's work is very interesting and is perhaps applicable to certain aspects of the crop circle phenomenon, in particular the geomagnetic aspects, the idea that earth energies may be attracting an atmospheric energy system of some kind to these areas where the crop circles occur.
So as we discussed with John, there are certain areas that perhaps crop circles occur in more often because of that geomagnetic energy or the structures underneath the soil.
This last summer it was very interesting. Underneath southern England, of course, you have an aquifer, a chalk aquifer.
Yes.
And John measured the ground electrical charge in southern England over the summer. And as the aquifer lowers, as the water table lowers, the ground electric charge is increased. And curiously, the number of crop circles increase also as the summer progresses. Furthermore, this electric charge is greatest near the edges of the aquifer. And lo and behold, many of the crop circles occur at the edges of the aquifers. So it's tantalizing. It suggests a connection.
Well, that's fascinating. And so your research shows that perhaps these earth energies attract other energies from the atmosphere in some way that may be responsible for creating these crop circles.
Well, William Levengood, the biophysicist in Michigan, demonstrated very clearly that there are changes in the plants and in the soils which are consistent with exposure to a plasma.
For those who don't know, could you explain what a plasma is?
I'll use John Burke's explanation because it's the simplest one for me. Electrified, it's electrified air molecules. Now, an example of a plasma that you would be familiar with is a lightning strike, a lightning bolt. That's a high energy plasma. A low energy plasma would be your fluorescent lights, for instance. That's a plasma, a low energy plasma.
I was just going to ask if it's related to the northern lights or the aurora borealis.
Well, the northern lights is another display, but again, a relatively low energy plasma discharge. Now, Levengood's idea was that perhaps if science has only learned in the last 10, 15 years that these plasmas can penetrate the reflective layers of the ionosphere down to 5, 6, 7, 8 miles, that perhaps they could penetrate all the way down to the Earth's surface. And the result would be these crop circles. There's enough evidence here to suggest this is a reasonable approach to the phenomenon. And if we now look at the plant work and the soil results, and I show you exactly what's happened to the plants and what's happened to the soils, and how that can be related to this discharge of a plasma, it becomes even more reasonable. Whether it's the final reality, I don't know. But the job of science is to get the data and then see where the data leads you.
In crop circles, the wheat is bent at an angle and often is permanently bent at that angle and stays in that shape.
This is rapeseed, canola, a very thick plant. Clearly, this plant would fracture if you tried to bend it.
That's what's very interesting about these crop circles, that in many cases the crop is very brittle, and if it were mechanically bent, it would break.
It would break and shatter. You can flatten this stuff until you're blue in the face, and you're not going to produce these results.
Well, that's important for people to know, because I think the general consensus out there has been that these are fake, that they're hoaxes, they're created by people going out with ropes and boards. And
Well, that's what they've been told, haven't they?
they have been told that.
This is the first time, the first opportunity, as far as I know, for the public to actually hear some facts. Another thing the American public is unaware of is that crop circles occur here in the States and in Canada and in countries all over the world.
That's another reason why it would be difficult for the people who claim that they've created the crop circles to have
Doug
created
and Dave
them.
were very busy.
Doug and Dave, two little men who went out after the
pub's
drinks at the
closed.
pub, did not make all the crop circles in the world.
Well, if they did, they somehow or other managed to be in 5 or 6 countries simultaneously. But one of the first findings that Levengood obtained was node elongation. The nodes are knuckle-like protuberances along the stem of the plant.
And these are
Here
samples
are-
that are taken from crop circles.
Yeah, these are. Let me explain this. The nodes are the part of the plant that holds the most water. Plasmas automatically, when they spiral, emit microwaves. What do microwaves do? If you have a microwave oven, the microwaves go to the water molecules in whatever it is you're cooking. Well, what we found is in the plants, here we have the majority of the water is at the nodes, and what happens is that water turns to steam, and as it evaporates, it stretches the tender part of the top part of the plant, the apical node. Now, the same thing happens lower down on the stems, but there, because the outer fibers are tough, they're not elastic, they won't stretch. The steam, in order to get out, has to actually blow a hole. Here are these holes blown out at the nodes. Again, the steam pressure inside the plant stem is so intense the steam has to escape, and in the tougher tissue down at the base of the plant, it explodes these holes.
And this is mature crop.
This was fully mature when it occurred. This is the formation itself at Stanton St. Bernard in England.
This is a very elaborate formation, actually. It has a number of different
When you hear this
circles.
talk about simple circles
Yes.
are the only ones that are genuine, I beg to differ.
Well, in fact, that is the impression that many people have, that the simple circles are maybe caused by a whirlwind or some phenomena that would create something not so complex. But these are very elaborate and beautiful formations.
These changes that Levengood has documented now for 12 years absolutely cannot be caused by flattening, mechanical flattening, planks, boards, feet, cement rollers. In addition to this sort of work, which Levengood has repeated, we did, during the years that we were doing this very actively, I think we managed some 250 formations around the world in 8 different countries that were sampled in depth, producing consistently these changes.
Well, this is the type of work that will prove that this is a real phenomenon. Other people are speculating. You're actually doing the research.
Most people are not aware that crop circles occur in all sorts of material.
Yes, that's right. I think most people assume that they're all in wheat, but they're not.
Oats, barley, rye, all sorts of cereal crops. They also occur in grasses. We have them all the time in grasses. Later on, we're going to talk about one that I saw happen in string beans.
Nancy had a very amazing experience that we will go into in depth later.
Now, if the science weren't enough to convince me, that really was. This is a growth anomaly at the base of the seed head. You see that spiraled
Yes,
thing?
the stalk is actually bent in a spiral.
The energy that caused that change had to have occurred when the plants were very young.
I see.
Now, the formation didn't occur until August. So what's happening here? In other words, there were no flattened plants until August, and yet Levengood is positive that this had to occur, let's say, in late June, at an early growth stage.
That's very curious, isn't it?
Now, the reason I bring this up is that I know you've talked about and have heard about these balls of light.
The orbs they're referred to,
that are seen
yes.
around crop circles and videotape.
Yes.
I have no idea whether this has anything to do with it, but the orbs are photographed and videotaped frequently over fields in which subsequently crop circles are found.
So maybe this isn't just a one-step
Maybe it's
process.
a two-stage or more.
Yes.
That's the question now. Now, among Levengood's other work, one of the things that he has done for years is do germinations. The lower photograph here are some samples, a sample and a control, from a formation in California. Now, this happened to be in grasses, no cereal crop at all. What happened in this case, Levengood had taken some clippings from these plants to do a test he calls the Radox test, and had put them back in the box, forgotten about them. They sat there for over a week. And one day, he opened up the box to see whether it was something he had to do or had already done, and found these. Now, no light, no water, for 8, 9, 10 days, whatever it was. You can see the control is dead, and look at the formation.
That's fantastic, amazing. The control is brown and dried up. The one that was in the dark and not watered is
Both of them
lush and green and bigger.
I mean, obviously, the formation was doing just fine. The controls died under normal circumstances. Most plants will die given no water and no light for 7 or 8 days.
Now, does this relate to what John Burke was saying about perhaps in ancient cultures, in the ancient monuments and mounds, the seeds were taken there for the purpose of energizing them?
One wonders.
One does.
One wonders.
When we're talking about the same energies.
It sounds like we may be, and the question, of course, is did ancient people, were they aware of this? And if they were, how did they become aware? I'm almost as interested in knowing how they found it out as whether or not they did know it.
Maybe they weren't as primitive as we think that they were.
Perhaps they were not.
Nancy, I'd like to ask you if Levengood has done any other research related to the crop circles other than with the plants.
Yeah, he did look at soils. A fortuitous event in 1993 at Churhill in England. This is in the Wiltshire area. A crop circle had occurred at the very end of the season there. This is late August. It was discovered that something that looked like a metallic glaze. It was not only covering the plants, it was actually embedded in them. Here is a photograph to show how it is embedded in.
This is really quite remarkable. There are little round pellets of metal that are embedded into the...
Tiny little pieces, literally inside the husks of the wheat seeds. This one is marvelous. It shows a bubble. You see, this is underneath a scanning electron microscope, and that that bubble is one little piece of this, one little molecule of the iron bubbling up because it was hot.
If there was that much heat, Nancy, why didn't the crop catch on fire?
Because the heat was happening up in the atmosphere is part of it. The heat was dissipated by the time it actually hit the crop. But also there is a very thin waxy covering on the outside of plants. And if the heat is brief enough, the plant can be protected because of that. And these are photographs to show you. We found repeatedly now 75–80% of the crop circles that we investigate have this molten iron chunks, in the soil, or these tiny little spheres. Now again, what happens to molten iron when you drop it? How did we make bullets in the Revolutionary War? We heated up lead and we dumped it off of towers.
That's what makes it round.
That's what makes it round. And we find these little round spheres everywhere inside crop circles.
The research is beyond doubt. You've done very careful studies. It's published in scientific journals. Why do people still think that these are made by two little men with boards in the middle of the night?
Mostly it's because that's what they've been told. I think the public, when they're presented with the facts, when they are actually aware of what we know, I think at that point the public will ask some very good questions. The public's not stupid. They simply have been treated as if they were stupid by the majority of the media. So if the media is misinforming the public, well, the scientists are being misinformed too.
Now, Nancy, I know that you started out as a skeptic in all of this.
Not really a skeptic. I was extremely cautious in what I was going to think about. I had a certain emotional response to the designs. They were very strange, very intriguing. But I've had a demonstration, several actually now, and one very dramatic one last summer, where I saw a formation occur right in front of my face. And when you see it, it's impossible to escape. I guarantee you there were no planks and boards. I had been with a young man in Holland who's very unusual and has crop circles happen around him. And every night he and I had gone out to take photographs in crop circles, because you sometimes get very strange photographs in crop circles at night, and he loves to do that. And this particular night he wanted to go back out again, and I was irritated. And I said to him, you know, that I was sick and tired of the phenomenon. Why couldn't it be more explicit, easier to study? Why was it so hard to study? And the hell with it, I was going upstairs and going to bed. Well, I got into my nightgown, I was sitting in the bed reading for a while, and I started to hear the cattle in the barn right down the road begin to bellow. Now, I know from talking to hundreds, if not thousands by now, of farmers and ranch hands and people, that when crop circles occur, frequently you have this animal disturbance. I stayed in the bed and I kept reading. The cattle became quiet. A little bit, 5-10 minutes elapsed, and then they started again. And this time they were really bellowing. It was very loud. Well, the next thing that happened was this tube of light, a column or a tube, perfectly even all the way down.
Like a shaft coming down?
Came screaming down from above. I have never seen anything, I hope I never see anything again with quite that much energy. I don't know how to explain the force with which that thing came down. But here was this tube of brilliant light, and it lasted for a few seconds, and then it disappeared. There was no sound, there was no smell, nothing. It was like it didn't happen. And I was kind of just startled. And then, boom, another one, almost in exactly the same location as the first. And again, the outside lit up, the inside lit up. There was this incredible force. And then it went out. And before I could get out of bed, a third one came down. And it was such force that you tend to go like this. I mean,
it was very bright.
I wasn't quite sure just how close it was. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure it wasn't going to get me. But anyhow, I'm yelling for Robert by this time, and he is halfway up the stairs because he's seen it. He's yelling for me. And we went immediately to the fence, and I had a flashlight, and I shined it over. And there, in the closest growing crop to my bed, and in full view from the bed, I might add, was this brand new crop circle.
So this was a demonstration to you of everything that you had studied
pretty clear
occurring right in front of you.
Yeah.
And on demand.
And no planks or boards.
And I think this is probably the best evidence we have on this planet of something that does exist beyond ourselves.
I think it may be. And it intrigues me. It's going to keep me staying tuned, as they say.
Thank you, Patricia. Very nice. Very well done.
Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, what was very exciting is that Nancy presented the information in a rational, logical fashion that convinced me that crop circles are indeed not hoaxes, not pranks, but real phenomena that has an unknown mystery.
Well, some of the crop circles are hoaxes, and that's fairly easy to prove. But what Nancy's talking about are actual changes in the plants themselves, in the soil, and these are things that can't be created by hoaxers.
And what many people feel, from what I've heard, is that there's an energy quality. Once you stand in these circles, you can feel it. Well, you have, so what have you felt?
Yes, I have done a lot of crop circle research. I've been one of those people that runs around to the crop circles in England, and I've recently seen one in the United States. And I do have a feeling of the energy when I walk into those. I can feel it very strongly.
Well, it's sort of like John Burke was saying, these ancient peoples could feel energy, so I think people now are rediscovering their sensitivity to all sorts of phenomena.
Yes, well, some of us are more sensitive than others, but I think in general people are reconnecting with the source, with their own bodies even, and becoming again sensitive to these energies.
So what do you think the crop circles are really there to tell us?
I think they're there to connect us back into our rightful place in the universe.
For me, they seem like a language. When I look at them, there's information that comes to me that I'm not conscious of, but I am somehow changed or transformed by.
Well, I think that's part of how they connect us back into this place that we have fallen from or lost. They are communicating with us.
So we'll be investigating more of this type of phenomena and new research in this area and other areas. So stay tuned as we take you beyond. I'm Alan Steinfeld.
I'm Dr. Patricia Hill, and you have just gone beyond.